Poor girl returns the billionaire's missing wallet, not knowing it was a test. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The rain had started hours ago, turning the streets into mirrors of trembling light. Inside a small downtown diner, a young waitress named Grace wiped the counter for the 5th time that night. The fluorescent sign outside flickered weakly, buzzing like a tired insect. It was almost closing time. Her sneakers were soaked, her apron damp, and her hands cracked from endless dishwashing. Still, she smiled whenever a customer entered. She needed every tip she could get. Her mother's medicine and the overdue electric bill were waiting at home. The bell over the door jingled one last time before closing. A man in a tailored grey coat walked in, tall, mid-40s, the kind of presence that made people straighten their backs without knowing why. Grace greeted him softly. "We are about to close, sir, but I can still get you coffee." He nodded, distracted, as he searched his briefcase for something. When he finally left, the booth still smelled faintly of expensive cologne and cedar leather. Grace began clearing the table and noticed a small object on the floor near the seat. It was a wallet, sleek, black, and unmistakably expensive. She picked it up carefully. The initials AM were engraved in gold on the corner. Inside were several crisp $100 bills, platinum credit cards, and a driver's license showing the same man's face, Alexander Monroe, CEO of Monroe Holdings. Grace froze. That amount of cash could cover her mother's medication for months. Her heart pounded. The rain outside seemed louder now, almost accusing. She looked at the clock. 11:45. He must have been rushing to catch a car before the storm worsened. For a long moment she stood there, clutching the wallet, the fluorescent light humming above her like a question. Then she exhaled and whispered to herself, "No, it is not mine." She took out the diner's lost and found logbook, wrote down the time and description, sealed the wallet in a paper bag, and locked it in the manager's cabinet. When she stepped outside, the rain hit her face like needles. Her coat was thin, her shoes heavy with water, but her chest felt strangely light. The next morning, she returned to her shift early. The manager told her that someone had called Mr. Monroe's assistant. They wanted to thank the staff member who had turned in the missing wallet. Grace felt her throat tighten. People would laugh at her for not keeping it. They always did. But as she poured coffee for the first customer of the morning, she caught her reflection in the window, tired eyes. Yes, but still honest. And somehow, that felt like enough. The following morning, Grace's life returned to its usual rhythm of clinking dishes, ringing orders, and the smell of frying oil that never seemed to wash off her hands. The diner opened at 7, but she had been there since 6:30, brewing coffee and wiping tables before the first customers arrived. Her manager, Mr. Lawson, was a kind but exhausted man in his 50s who had owned the diner for 20 years. When he approached her that morning, his expression was oddly serious. "Grace," he said, "someone from Monroe Holdings called earlier. The man who lost his wallet yesterday wants to meet the employee who turned it in. Said it was important." Grace blinked, her fingers tightening around the coffee pot she was holding. "Me? Why?" Mr. Lawson shrugged. He did not say, just that he appreciated your honesty and would like a short meeting at his office downtown. Grace's stomach twisted. Monroe Holdings was one of the city's largest corporations. The very name carried weight. "I do not have anything to wear to a meeting like that," she murmured. Mr. Lawson smiled faintly. "Wear what you always do, Grace. Sometimes decency is the best outfit." At noon, she took the subway downtown, clutching a worn tote bag. The train rattled through tunnels that smelled faintly of metal and rain. She rehearsed what she would say, something polite and brief. "Thank you. I just did what was right," that sort of thing. But as she stepped into the towering glass building that housed Monroe Holdings, her breath caught. The lobby alone was larger than her entire apartment building, all marble floors and golden light. The receptionist greeted her warmly, as if expecting her. "Miss Grace Miller, Mr. Monroe will see you now." She followed an assistant through hallways that smelled faintly of polished wood and citrus cleaner. When the elevator doors opened on the top floor, the view stunned her. The skyline stretched endlessly beyond the glass walls, the city glittering under the afternoon. Sunday Alexander Monroe stood near the window, the same calm composure in his stance as she remembered from the diner. He turned, his grey suit immaculate, his expression unreadable. "Miss Miller," he said, his voice low and steady. "Thank you for coming." Grace nodded quickly. "Of course, sir. I just wanted to make sure the wallet was returned safely." "It was," he said. "Everything was still inside. You did not even open it, according to my assistant." Grace shook her head. "No, sir. I thought it would be better if I did not." He studied her for a long moment, then gestured to a chair. "Please, sit," she obeyed, careful to keep her hands folded in her lap. The office felt both intimidating and strangely quiet, like a place where important decisions were made without raising a voice. "Do you know," he began, "how many people have worked in that diner this month?" Grace hesitated. "Maybe 6. 11, he corrected softly. "And out of those 11, you were the only one who turned in something that did not belong to them. In fact, you were the only one who did not even hesitate." Grace felt her cheeks flush. "I do not think honesty should be unusual, sir." A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Neither do I, but lately it has become rare." He leaned back in his chair, his eyes thoughtful. "Tell me, Grace, how long have you been working there?" "Almost 3 years," she replied. "Since my mother got sick. It pays the bills, mostly." "And you never thought of leaving?" Grace gave a small, tired laugh. "It is not easy to find better work without a degree. I tried once, but interviews always end the same way. 'We will call you.' They never do." Monroe nodded slowly, as if filing the detail away. "I understand." He stood and walked toward the window, the light casting soft shadows across his face. "You remind me of someone I used to know. Someone who believed character mattered more than circumstances." Grace rose from her seat uncertainly. "Thank you, sir. I did not mean to take up your time." He turned back toward her. "Wait, there is one more thing." He opened a drawer and placed an envelope on the desk. "A small reward," he said. Grace's heart skipped. She shook her head firmly. "I cannot accept that. I did not do it for money." Monroe studied her face carefully, his expression unreadable again. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Very well." He slid the envelope back into the drawer without another word. Grace left the building feeling both relieved and strangely unsettled. The elevator doors closed behind her, and she caught one last glimpse of Monroe staring after her, a faint, almost knowing smile on his lips. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the air smelled of new beginnings, though Grace did not yet know that her life had just changed in ways she could not imagine. Grace returned to the diner the next morning, still unsure what to make of her meeting with Alexander Monroe. She had expected him to thank her politely and move on, but the way he had studied her made her uneasy, as if there had been something more behind his questions. She pushed the thought aside and focused on work. Life went on, bills still waited, and her mother still needed medication. By lunchtime, the diner was buzzing with its usual crowd of regulars, construction workers, office employees, and tired parents with restless kids. Grace balanced 3 plates on one arm while pouring coffee for a table of truck drivers with the other. Her co-worker Jenny leaned over the counter. "Hey, Grace, some guy in a suit asked for you." Grace frowned. "A customer?" Jenny nodded toward a corner booth. "Looks that way. Expensive suit, serious face. Definitely not one of our regulars." Grace wiped her hands on her apron and turned. The man was tall, wearing a navy suit that fit too well to be off the rack. His hair was neatly combed, and he had that calm confidence of someone used to giving orders. When she approached, he stood and smiled politely. "Miss Miller? My name is David Cole. I work for Monroe Holdings." Her heart gave a startled jump. "Oh, hello. Is everything all right?" "Yes, everything is fine," he said with a reassuring tone. "Mr. Monroe asked me to deliver something personally. He said it is for your eyes only." He handed her a sealed envelope with the Monroe Holdings insignia embossed in gold. She took it cautiously. "Please tell Mr. Monroe I said thank you." David nodded, his polite smile never faltering. "Of course. He also asked me to tell you there is no expectation, only opportunity." Then he turned and left as quietly as he had arrived. Grace waited until her shift ended before opening the envelope in the small locker room behind the diner. Inside was a letter typed neatly on company stationery. It read, "Miss Miller, character cannot be taught, but it can be recognized. There is an opening in our accounting department for an entry-level position. If you are willing to learn, Consider this a personal recommendation. A. Monroe. Attached was a printed card with an appointment time for an interview and a subway pass, loaded with enough fare to last several weeks. Grace stared at the letter, her mind spinning. An accounting position? She had never worked in an office, never even finished college. Surely there had been some mistake. But the letter had her name, her handwriting from the lost and found log still faintly imprinted on the corner where he must have kept it. That night she told her mother, who listened from the worn couch in their small living room, her frail hands wrapped around a cup of tea. "You should go," her mother said softly. "People like that do not offer second chances for nothing." Grace looked at her mother's tired eyes and nodded. The following morning she put on her cleanest blouse and the black skirt she had worn for her high school graduation. The building seemed even more intimidating than before, but she reminded herself that she had faced worse. The receptionist recognized her instantly. "Miss Miller, they are expecting you on the 12th floor." The elevator ride felt endless. When the doors opened, she found herself in a hallway lined with framed photographs of Monroe Holdings projects around the country. A young woman with a tablet greeted her and led her into a glass-walled conference room. Inside sat 3 people, including Alexander Monroe himself. He offered a small nod. "Good morning, Miss Miller. Please, sit." Grace obeyed, feeling her palms grow damp. The interview was unlike anything she had imagined. The 2 other managers asked about her math skills, her attention to detail, how she handled mistakes at work. Grace answered honestly, "I do not know everything, but I am willing to learn. I just need someone to give me a chance." When it ended, Monroe stood and extended his hand. "We will be in touch soon." His grip was firm but warm. As she left, she could not shake the feeling that this meeting, like the wallet, was another kind of test. Outside, she stood on the sidewalk, the city humming around her. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, doing the right thing had finally led somewhere worth going. 3 days later, Grace was back at the diner wiping tables when her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She hesitated before answering. "Hello, this is Grace Miller." A woman's voice came through, polite but brisk. "Good afternoon, Miss Miller. This is Samantha from Monroe Holdings. I am calling to inform you that you have been selected for the accounting trainee position. Congratulations. Your first day will be Monday at 8 in the morning." Grace froze, her heart thudding. "I thank you. Thank you very much." When the call ended, she stood in stunned silence, the sounds of clattering dishes and chatter around her fading. Jenny caught her expression. "What happened? You look like you won the lottery." Grace smiled, tears of relief pricking her eyes. "In a way, I think I did." That night, she sat at the small kitchen table with her mother, reading the offer letter again under the dim light. Her mother's thin fingers brushed the edge of the paper. "You see, sweetheart, when you keep your integrity, the world notices eventually." Grace nodded, her voice soft. "I just hope I can do it right." Monday morning arrived, grey and windy. Grace wore the same blouse and skirt from the interview, now freshly pressed. She took the subway downtown, clutching her worn tote bag filled with a notebook, a cheap pen, and a packed sandwich. When she stepped into Monroe Holdings again, she was greeted by the same receptionist who smiled warmly this time. "Welcome aboard, Miss Miller. Orientation is on the 10th floor." The day was a blur of introductions, paperwork, and computer logins. She learned where the break room was, met her supervisor, Mr. Benson, a patient man with kind eyes, and was assigned a small cubicle near the window. Grace had never sat at a desk like that before. The computer hummed quietly, the city stretched out beyond the glass, and for the first time in years, she felt a strange, cautious pride. Around noon, she went to the cafeteria. The room was large, bright, and full of chatter. Most of the employees sat in groups, laughing over sandwiches and salads. Grace picked an empty corner table, unwrapped her simple lunch, and tried not to feel out of place. That was when a woman in her early 30s approached her. "Mind if I join you?" she asked with an easy smile. "I am Claire, from Human Resources." Grace nodded quickly. "Of course, I am Grace. First day." "I guessed," Claire said, sitting down. "I remember my first day, terrified of touching the wrong button." Grace laughed quietly. "That is exactly how I feel." Claire leaned closer. "Well, for what it is worth, everyone here has heard about you." Grace blinked. "About me? The wallet story," Claire said with a grin. It went around the office like wildfire. The boss rarely gets surprised, but that day he was speechless. Grace flushed. "Oh no, I did not mean for anyone to know." "Do not worry," Claire said. "People admire that kind of honesty. You would be surprised how much it means around here." The rest of the day passed more easily after that. Grace learned how to enter invoices, balance accounts, and use the software she had never seen before. By 5 in the evening, her brain felt full, but her heart was light. As she was shutting down her computer, a shadow fell across her desk. She looked up. Alexander Monroe stood there, his expression calm but curious. "How was your first day, Miss Miller?" Grace scrambled to her feet. "Good, sir. I mean, a lot to learn, but good." He smiled faintly. "Good to hear. If you need anything, do not hesitate to ask." "Thank you," she said quietly. He paused, then added, "By the way, do not let anyone make you feel small here. You earned your place." Then he turned and walked away, leaving her speechless. As Grace rode the subway home, the city lights flickering past the windows, she replayed his words over and over. In her entire life, no one had ever told her she had earned something. That night, when she tucked her mother into bed, she whispered, "Maybe things really are changing." Outside, the wind rattled the old window frames, but inside, for the first time in a long while, Grace felt warm. 2 weeks passed in a blur of spreadsheets, emails, and late evenings where Grace stayed behind to double-check her work. Every day she learned something new, and every night she returned home with quiet pride, showing her mother the small badge with her name on it. Grace Miller, Accounting Department, Monroe Holdings. Her mother would smile faintly, proud but tired, the illness leaving her voice softer than before. Grace's new routine felt almost unreal compared to her old life. Gone were the greasy aprons and long shifts at the diner. Now she wore clean blouses and carried a company laptop. Still, she never forgot where she came from. She kept her old diner uniform folded neatly in her closet, a reminder that humility and hard work had brought her here. On Friday afternoon, just before closing, Mr. Benson stopped by her desk. "Grace, Mr. Monroe wants to see you in his office before you leave." Her stomach tightened. She had barely spoken to him since that first day. She straightened her papers, smoothed her skirt, and made her way to the top floor. His assistant opened the door with a polite smile. "Go right in, Miss Miller." Inside, the view of the city gleamed under the sunset. Monroe stood near the window, his jacket off, sleeves rolled, studying something on his tablet. He turned when she entered. "Grace, good evening. Sit down, please." She obeyed, hands folded tightly in her lap. He set the tablet aside. "I wanted to personally thank you for your progress. Mr. Benson speaks highly of your work. You have a sharp eye for detail." Grace's face warmed. "Thank you, sir. I'm just trying to learn as much as I can." He nodded. "That is good. But tell me, how are you adjusting? It must be a big change from the diner." Grace hesitated. "It is, sir. I still feel like I am catching up. Everyone here is so smart. Sometimes I worry I will not belong." His tone softened. "You belong because you earned it. Remember that." Then, after a pause, he added, "I am hosting a company dinner next week for the department heads. It is a chance for people to meet across teams. You should come." Grace's eyes widened. "Me? Sir? I do not think—" "You are part of this company now," he said simply. "You will learn more from a single conversation at that dinner than from a month at your desk." She nodded, still unsure. "Yes, sir. I will be there." That night, as she walked home, she could hardly focus on anything else. A company dinner meant expensive suits, elegant dresses, and polished conversation. She owned none of those things. Over the weekend, she borrowed a modest navy dress from her neighbor and spent hours ironing it until it looked new. When the evening arrived, she rode the subway to the hotel where the dinner was held. The ballroom shimmered with light, crystal chandeliers reflecting off silverware and polished marble floors. Waiters moved gracefully between tables carrying trays of hors d'oeuvre. Grace stood at the entrance, trying to steady her breathing. She spotted Claire from Human Resources, who waved her over. "You made it," Claire said warmly. "Come, I will introduce you to a few people." Grace followed her through the crowd, nodding shyly at introductions. The executives were polite, but their eyes occasionally flickered with mild curiosity at her simple dress. A few whispered among themselves, but Grace ignored it, focusing on listening and smiling. Near the end of the evening, Monroe took the stage to give a short speech. His words were measured and calm, thanking his team for their dedication and emphasizing the company's belief in character and effort. As he spoke, his gaze swept across the room and lingered briefly on Grace. After the applause, several people approached him, but he excused himself quickly and walked toward her. "I am glad you came," he said quietly. "You look very professional." "Thank you, sir," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. He gestured toward a quieter corner. "Tell me, Grace, what do you think of the people here?" She smiled nervously. "They are impressive, confident. They seem to belong in a world I am still learning." Monroe studied her expression. "You see things most people overlook. That is a rare strength." Before she could reply, one of the executives approached with a glass of champagne. "Mr. Monroe, your speech was excellent." His eyes flicked to Grace. "And who is this?" "One of our new hires," Monroe said. "Miss Miller." The man smiled thinly. "Ah, the wallet story. It is making the rounds, you know." Grace's cheeks flushed, but Monroe's expression remained steady. "Some stories deserve to be told," he said. Later, as Grace left the ballroom, she realized that for the first time, she had not felt like an outsider. She was still finding her place, but tonight, she had taken one small step closer. The next week at Monroe Holdings began like any other, but for Grace, something felt different. After the dinner, several colleagues who had barely spoken to her before now greeted her in the hallway with polite smiles. Claire from Human Resources dropped by her cubicle more often, offering tips on navigating the company systems. Even Mr. Benson seemed warmer, giving her slightly more responsibility with invoices and budgets. Still, Grace sensed an invisible line she was not yet allowed to cross. The higher-ranking employees chatted about weekend getaways, charity events, and golf clubs conversations she could only listen to in silence. On Wednesday morning, she arrived early to catch up on data entry when she noticed an envelope on her desk. Inside was a short note in Monroe's handwriting. "Join me in conference room 3 at 10 a.m. Her pulse quickened. She had not spoken to him since the dinner. When 10 o'clock came, she walked down the long corridor lined with framed awards and stepped into the glass-walled room. Monroe was already there, reviewing papers spread across the table. He looked up when she entered and gave a small nod. "Grace, thank you for coming. Sit down." She obeyed, unsure why she had been called. "We are reviewing proposals for a community outreach project," he said. "I remember you mentioned your mother's medical challenges. You probably understand better than most what struggling families go through. I want your input on this." Grace blinked, caught off guard. "Me, sir?" He smiled faintly. "Yes, you. You are the reason I started this initiative. The world could use more people who do the right thing, even when no one is watching." He handed her a folder. Inside were outlines for a program that would provide free financial education to low-income families. Grace read the first page, her throat tightening. "This is incredible," she whispered, "but I do not know anything about project management." "You will learn," he said simply. "Work with my assistant, David. You will report to me directly on this." She looked up, stunned. "Thank you, sir. I will do my best." "I know you will," he replied. Over the next few days, Grace threw herself into the work, staying late to research programs, gather data, and write summaries. David, though reserved, seemed impressed by her diligence. "You are the first person I have seen who reads every line of these reports," he said one evening. Grace smiled. "If I'm going to speak for people like me, I should understand everything." David nodded, thoughtful. "Mr. Monroe was right about you." Late Friday afternoon, Monroe visited the project room to review their progress. Grace presented her findings, her voice steady despite her nerves. When she finished, Monroe leaned back in his chair, clearly satisfied. "Excellent work, Miss Miller. I would like you to attend the meeting with our board next week to present this." Grace froze. "Sir, me? I have never spoken in front of executives." "You will do fine," he said. "You speak from experience. That is something no training can teach." When he left, Grace sat in stunned silence. A year ago, she had been wiping counters in a diner, invisible to everyone. Now she was preparing to stand before the board of Monroe Holdings. That weekend, she spent hours practicing her speech in front of her mother, who listened with proud tears in her eyes. "You sound confident," her mother said softly, "like someone who knows where she belongs." On Monday morning, Grace arrived early, wearing her best blouse and the modest necklace her mother had given her. As she rehearsed quietly in the conference room, she heard Monroe's voice outside. "She is ready," he told someone. Then the door opened, and the board members filed in. Grace stood tall, heart pounding but steady. This was her chance to prove she was more than the girl who returned a lost wallet. She was someone who belonged here, not by luck, but by character. When she began to speak, her voice was calm and clear, carrying through the room with a quiet conviction that made even the most senior executives listen. The boardroom was silent as Grace finished her presentation. She had rehearsed every word, but her voice still trembled slightly at the beginning. Yet as she spoke about the struggles of working families, her confidence grew. She told them about her mother's medical bills, about counting coins at grocery stores, and about how a little financial knowledge could change a person's life. Her sincerity filled the room in a way that no chart or statistic could. When she ended with the words, "Sometimes, all people need is someone to believe they are capable of more," the room remained quiet for a long moment before the first applause broke out. Mr. Benson smiled proudly, and even the sternest of the executives nodded approvingly. Alexander Monroe sat at the head of the table, his expression calm but his eyes thoughtful, as if seeing something he had been waiting for. "Thank you, Miss Miller," he said when the applause subsided. "That was exactly what this company needed to hear." Grace felt her knees weaken slightly with relief, but she kept her composure and thanked them politely. After the meeting, several managers approached her to shake her hand and compliment her work. "You spoke from the heart," one of them said. "We could use more people like you." Grace smiled shyly, still overwhelmed. As the crowd thinned, Monroe approached her. "You did well," he said quietly. "Better than well, actually. You reminded this company why we started in the first place." She smiled, unsure how to respond. "Thank you, sir. I just told the truth." "That is exactly why it mattered," he said. "Truth is hard to come by in rooms like this." Later that afternoon, as Grace was packing up her things, David stopped by her cubicle. "Word travels fast around here," he said with a grin. "You made quite an impression. The board approved the project unanimously." Grace looked up, wide-eyed. "Really? Really? They are launching it next month, and guess who they want as project coordinator?" She blinked in disbelief. "Me?" David laughed softly. "Yes, you," Mr. Monroe insisted. Grace could barely find words. "I do not even know what to say." "Say yes," David replied simply. That evening, Grace took the subway home in quiet amazement. The city lights blurred past the windows, and she rested her forehead against the cool glass, replaying the day over and over. She had spoken in front of the most powerful people she had ever met, and they had listened. At home, she found her mother waiting up despite the late hour. Grace handed her the printed memo announcing the new project. "I got promoted," she said softly. Her mother's eyes filled with tears. "I knew you would," she whispered. "Good people rise, even if it takes them longer." The next morning, Monroe called her into his office again. "I wanted to congratulate you personally," he said. "Your new role begins Monday. You will oversee the pilot program in the city's West District." Grace nodded, still overwhelmed. "Thank you, sir. I promise I will not let you down." He smiled faintly. "You have not so far." Then, after a pause, he added, "There is something you should know. The day I lost that wallet, it was not an accident." Grace frowned. "What do you mean?" Monroe leaned against his desk, his gaze steady. "It was a test. I had been trying to understand something, how people act when no one is watching. I left it on purpose. You were the only one who returned it untouched." Grace froze, her breath catching. "So all of this—" "No," he interrupted gently. "What came after was not part of the test. I did not expect to meet someone who reminded me what integrity looks like. You taught me more than any corporate seminar ever could." Grace was silent for a long moment, unsure whether to feel angry or grateful. Finally, she said quietly, "Maybe it was a test for both of us." Monroe's smile deepened. Maybe it was. As she left his office, the weight of his confession lingered in her mind. What had begun as a simple act of honesty had changed both of their lives in ways she was only beginning to understand. Grace could not stop thinking about what Alexander Monroe had told her. The idea that their first meeting had been part of a deliberate test left her uneasy, even if the result had brought her this far. For days she replayed his words in her mind, torn between gratitude and confusion. Yet as the week went on, she realized something important. Whether it had been a test or not, she had acted according to her values. That truth gave her peace. On Monday morning, She stepped into her new role as project coordinator. The West District office was smaller than headquarters, but the energy there was alive with purpose. The pilot program she helped design would teach low-income families how to manage debt, build savings, and plan for emergencies. Grace met with local volunteers, community leaders, and single parents who reminded her of her own past. She listened more than she spoke, taking notes as people shared stories of eviction, hospital bills, and hope. Each night she returned home exhausted but fulfilled. Her mother's health had stabilized, and the two of them had begun to dream of simple things again: weekend walks, maybe a small garden in the spring. One afternoon, as Grace was organizing reports, she received a call from David. "Mr. Monroe wants to visit the West District site this week," he said. "He would like you to walk him through the progress." Grace felt a ripple of nervous excitement. "Of course," she replied. The following Friday, Monroe arrived in a black company car. He stepped out wearing a plain grey coat, far less formal than usual. Grace greeted him at the door. "Welcome, sir. I did not expect you to come in person. Some things are worth seeing yourself," he said with a small smile. She led him through the office, introducing him to staff members and showing the classrooms where volunteers worked with families. Children played quietly in the corner while parents practiced budgeting exercises. Monroe watched in silence for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "This," he said finally, "is what matters. Not profits, not quarterly reports. People." Grace nodded. "They just need someone to give them a chance, like you gave me." He looked at her, his eyes softening. "No, Grace, you gave yourself that chance. I just noticed." After the tour, they walked outside together into the cool afternoon air. The sky was grey with hints of rain, just like the day they had first met at the diner. "Do you ever miss it?" Monroe asked suddenly. "The diner?" Grace smiled faintly. "Sometimes. There was a rhythm to it. Simple, honest work. But I do not miss the exhaustion." "You have come far," he said quietly. "Most people would have taken the money and walked away. You took the hard road instead." "Maybe," she said, "but I think the hard road was the right one." He studied her for a moment, then said, "Grace, I'm creating a new department next quarter, a social impact division. I want you to lead it." She stared at him, stunned. "Sir, I am not qualified to lead anything. I am still learning." "That is exactly why I want you," he said. "You lead with empathy, not ego. That cannot be taught." Grace hesitated, the weight of the offer sinking in. "I do not know what to say." "Say you will think about it," he replied. She nodded slowly. "All right, I will think about it." That night, as she rode the subway home, she watched the city lights flicker against the window. A year ago, she had counted coins to buy her mother's medicine. Now she was being asked to lead a program that could change lives. She thought of Monroe's words, of the wallet, of the path that had begun with one simple choice. As the train slowed near her stop, she whispered to herself, "Integrity is the only test that never ends." The words lingered in the air, soft but strong, as she stepped out into the rain, no longer afraid of what the future might hold. In the weeks that followed, Grace could hardly believe how quickly her life kept changing. The community project she had helped build was growing faster than anyone expected. Families who once came in hopeless now left smiling, carrying notebooks full of goals and plans. Local news stations began covering the program, calling it a model for ethical corporate outreach. Each time she saw the stories, Grace felt proud but humbled. She knew it was not about fame. It was about restoring dignity to people who had forgotten what it felt like to be seen. Alexander Monroe kept his distance, though he checked in regularly by email, asking for updates and offering advice. Grace noticed that his tone was different now, less formal, more personal. "Do not forget to rest," one of his messages read. "Even good work can wear down a good heart." She smiled when she read it, saving the message like a quiet encouragement she did not know she needed. One Thursday afternoon, as she was finalizing monthly reports, Mr. Benson called. "Grace, there is an issue you should be aware of. Some members of the board are questioning the cost of the program. They think it is too generous." Grace frowned. "But the numbers show it is sustainable. The donations cover it." "They are not looking at numbers," he said carefully. "They are looking at optics. They think it makes the company seem sentimental instead of strategic." Grace felt a wave of frustration. Helping people should never be bad optics. "I know," he said, "but not everyone sees it that way. Mr. Monroe is defending the program, But the board wants a meeting next week. They will want you there. Grace hung up, feeling the familiar ache of doubt creep in. That night, she told her mother about the situation while helping her with dinner. Sometimes good intentions make people uncomfortable, her mother said gently. But that does not mean they are wrong. Grace nodded, her resolve firming. The following week, she sat across from the board again, this time not as a nervous trainee but as the coordinator of a successful project. The same men and women who had applauded her months ago now questioned her choices. "Miss Miller," one of them said, adjusting his glasses, "your reports are thorough, but the costs continue to rise. Why do we need to spend this much on families that may not even become customers?" Grace met his gaze steadily. "Because humanity should not have a price tag," she said simply. A murmur went around the table. Monroe sat quietly, observing her. Another member spoke. "You are very passionate, Miss Miller, but we run a business, not a charity." Grace took a breath. "With respect, sir, doing good does not mean losing profit. This program gives people stability. Stable families build stronger communities. Stronger communities support local businesses, including ours. It is not sentiment. It is sustainability." The room fell silent for a moment. Then Monroe leaned forward. "I agree," he said firmly. "The program stands." His tone carried finality. The matter was settled. After the meeting, Grace caught up with him in the hallway. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You did not have to defend me." Monroe looked at her with a faint smile. "I was not defending you, Grace. I was defending what is right." For a moment they stood there in silence, the hum of the office faint in the background. Then he added softly, "You spoke better than I ever could. That is why I trust you with this work." Later that night, Grace walked home under a clear sky, the stars faint above the city lights. She thought about how far she had come from a waitress counting tips to a woman who could stand in front of a boardroom and speak her truth. The world had not gotten easier, but she had gotten stronger. Her mother's words echoed in her mind, gentle but powerful. "Good people rise, even if it takes them longer." Grace smiled to herself. She finally understood what that meant. Winter came early that year, and with it, a sharp chill that crept through the city streets and glass towers. For Grace, the cold felt different this time. It was not the cold of hunger or unpaid bills, but of early mornings spent walking to work before the sun rose, of coffee that cooled too quickly on her desk because she was too busy to drink it. The community project had grown beyond anything she had imagined. 3 new offices had opened in nearby districts, and the company had partnered with several local charities to expand its reach. But success brought new pressure. The larger the program became, the more scrutiny it faced. Reporters asked about funding, rival companies questioned motives, and board members whispered about overextension. Through it all, Grace tried to stay focused on the people the program helped. One evening, as she reviewed spreadsheets in her office, David knocked lightly on the door. "You should go home," he said with a half smile. "It is past 9. Grace rubbed her eyes. "I just need to finish the quarterly report." He'd placed a folder on her desk. "Mr. Monroe wanted me to give you this. He said you might need it." Inside was a handwritten note and a small envelope. The note read, "You are doing more than anyone asked for. Remember to breathe. A.M." The envelope contained 2 tickets to a charity gala hosted by the company the following week. Grace smiled faintly. It was just like him, formal yet thoughtful. When the night of the gala arrived, she wore a simple black dress borrowed again from her neighbor. The event was held in the grand ballroom of a downtown hotel, full of glittering lights and soft music. People mingled, glasses clinked, and cameras flashed. Grace felt slightly out of place but comforted when she spotted Monroe speaking with a group near the stage. When he saw her, he excused himself and walked over. "You made it," he said warmly. "You clean up well." She laughed softly. "Thank you, sir. This is all a bit overwhelming." "It should be," he said. "You helped make it possible." Before she could respond, a journalist approached them. "Mr. Monroe, may I ask a few questions for the evening segment?" He nodded, and the reporter turned her attention to Grace. "Miss Miller, you are the woman behind the Community Finance Initiative, correct?" Grace blinked. "Well, part of it, yes." "How does it feel," the reporter continued, "to go from working in a diner to shaping one of the most talked-about corporate outreach programs in the city?" Grace hesitated, the microphone hovering near her face. She took a slow breath. "It feels humbling," she said at last, "because it reminds me that doing the right thing can take you further than you think." I am proof of that." The reporter smiled and thanked them before moving on. When she was gone, Monroe looked at Grace with quiet pride. "You handled that perfectly," he said. "You spoke like a leader." She shook her head. "I am still learning." "We all are," he replied. Later in the evening, as speeches began, Monroe took the stage. His voice carried easily across the room. "When this company was founded, my father told me that wealth means nothing unless it changes lives. Tonight, I am proud to say we are doing just that. And much of that credit goes to someone who reminded me of what honesty and courage look like." He paused, his eyes meeting Grace's across the room. "Miss Grace Miller, thank you." The audience applauded, and Grace felt her face flush with disbelief. She had not expected recognition, certainly not in front of hundreds of people. As Monroe continued his speech, she realized something deeper. It was not about praise or position. It was about purpose. Every choice, from that rainy night at the diner to this glittering ballroom, had led her to a place where she could help others stand again. When the applause faded, she whispered to herself, "Maybe kindness really does come full circle." And for the first time in years, she truly believed it. The days after the gala felt strangely quiet for Grace. The applause had faded, the lights were gone, and what remained was the steady rhythm of work once again. But something inside her had shifted. For the first time, she felt like she was not chasing survival anymore. She was building something that mattered. The community initiative had grown into a model other companies wanted to copy, and Monroe Holdings had earned unexpected praise for its genuine approach. Yet, amid all the success, Grace remained grounded. She still visited her mother every evening, cooked simple dinners, and called her old co-workers at the diner from time to time just to check in. One rainy Thursday, while Grace was reviewing reports, she received a call from Monroe's assistant, David. "Mr. Monroe asked if you could join him in the downtown office this afternoon. He said it is important." Grace glanced at the clock. "Of course, I will be there." When she arrived, Monroe's office felt different, quieter, heavier somehow. He was standing near the window, his expression distant. "Grace," he said, turning toward her, "thank you for coming." "Is everything all right?" she asked softly. He hesitated before answering. "I received an offer this morning. A major firm wants to acquire part of Monroe Holdings. They want to change the direction of our outreach programs, including yours." Grace's heart sank. "Change how?" "They want to make it more profitable," he said bitterly, "which means less help, fewer people served. They think compassion is bad business." Grace felt anger rise in her chest. "You are not going to let them, are you?" Monroe gave a faint smile. "Not if I can help it. But they hold a large stake now. The decision may come down to a vote." Grace stepped closer. "Then we fight it. We show them why it matters." He looked at her, eyes filled with quiet admiration. "You sound more like me than I do." "Maybe you reminded me how to be brave," she said softly. For a long moment, they stood there in silence, the sound of rain tapping against the glass. "There is something else," he said finally. "The board wants you to present your program results at the shareholders' meeting next week. They think hearing from you directly might sway the vote." Grace swallowed hard. "That is a lot of pressure." "You can handle it," he said. "You have handled worse." Over the next few days, she poured every ounce of energy into preparing for that presentation. She reviewed data, gathered testimonials, and rehearsed her words late into the night. Her mother watched her quietly, pride shining in her tired eyes. "Whatever happens," her mother said, "remember that your truth is enough." The morning of the meeting, Grace stood backstage in the large auditorium of the Monroe Holdings headquarters. The crowd was full of investors, executives, and reporters. She could hear murmurs about the potential acquisition, the tension thick in the air. Monroe found her just before she went on stage. "No matter what happens out there," he said, "you already changed this company." She smiled faintly. "Thank you, sir, for believing in me." "No," he said, "for reminding me what belief looks like." When her name was announced, Grace walked onto the stage, her heart pounding. She stood behind the podium, the bright lights making it hard to see the faces in front of her. Taking a deep breath, she began. "When I started working at a diner 2 years ago, I thought my life would never change. But one day, a man left his wallet behind. I returned it because it was the right thing to do, not knowing that moment would change both of our lives." The room grew silent as she spoke about honesty, about how kindness could be powerful even in business, and about the hundreds of families the program had helped. When she finished, she ended with quiet strength. Integrity is not weakness. It is the foundation of trust, and trust builds everything worth keeping. As she stepped back, the room erupted in applause. Somewhere in the crowd, Monroe smiled, knowing that whatever the vote would be, the company had already won something far more valuable. The shareholders' meeting stretched on for hours after Grace's speech. Executives debated numbers, investors asked sharp questions, and analysts murmured predictions. But Grace's words lingered in the air long after she left the stage. Even the most skeptical members of the board seemed quieter, thoughtful. She waited outside the conference hall with David, her hands clasped tightly together. "You did great," he whispered. "Now it is up to them." Grace nodded, though her heart raced. Every decision, every late night, every ounce of effort came down to this moment. When the doors finally opened, Monroe stepped out, his expression unreadable. He walked toward her slowly, and for a split second, she feared the worst. Then, a faint smile curved his lips. "We won," he said simply. Grace exhaled in disbelief. "We did?" "Unanimous vote," he confirmed. "The acquisition is off the table. The program stays exactly as it is." Relief flooded through her, and for the first time in days, she allowed herself to smile freely. "That is incredible," Monroe nodded. "You convinced them, Grace, not me. You." The following week, the story made headlines. Newspapers called it a rare victory for ethics in business, and Grace found herself being interviewed by local media again. She remained humble, always redirecting praise to the team and to the families whose stories inspired her. "We are just trying to make life fairer, one small step at a time," she told a reporter. As recognition grew, so did the program. Within months, Monroe Holdings launched new branches in neighboring states. Grace was promoted officially to Director of Social Impact, a title that came with more responsibility, but also more purpose. She built a team of people who shared her vision, former teachers, single parents, and volunteers who believed that compassion could coexist with ambition. Through it all, Monroe remained a steady presence, guiding but never overshadowing her. One evening, as they left a long strategy meeting, he walked beside her through the quiet lobby. "Do you ever stop to think about how far you have come?" he asked. Grace smiled faintly. "Sometimes, but then I remember there is still so much more to do." "That is what makes you different," he said. "Most people chase success. You chase meaning." She looked up at him. "Maybe I learned that from you." He chuckled softly. "Or maybe I learned it from you." Outside, the city lights shimmered against the wet pavement. They stopped near the entrance where his car waited. "Grace," he said after a pause, "I meant what I said before. The Social Impact Division is yours to lead. But if you ever need support, or even just a reminder that what you are doing matters, I am here." She nodded, her eyes warm. "Thank you, Mr. Monroe. I do not think I would have believed in myself if you had not believed first." "You would have," he replied. "You just needed a mirror." In the months that followed, Grace worked harder than ever, but she also learned to enjoy the moments in between, the laughter of her team, the gratitude of families, and the quiet evenings with her mother. The company had changed, and so had she. The woman who once thought honesty was her only asset had discovered that it was her greatest strength. And in a world that often rewarded shortcuts, she became living proof that integrity could still open doors. Late one night, after finishing her reports, she stood by her office window, overlooking the city skyline. The lights below looked like 1,000 tiny stars, each one a reminder of a life she might have touched. She thought about the wallet, about that night at the diner when everything began, and whispered to herself, maybe kindness was never about being noticed. Maybe it was about what it builds when no one is watching. Spring arrived slowly that year, washing the city in soft light and gentle rain. For Grace, the new season felt like a reflection of everything she had fought for: quiet renewal after long storms. The Social Impact Division had grown beyond what anyone thought possible, reaching thousands of families across the state. Every week brought new letters from people whose lives had changed because someone finally believed in them. Grace read each one carefully, never forgetting that she had once been one of them. Her mother's health had stabilized, and their small apartment now carried the warmth of peace. On weekends, Grace helped her plant flowers on the balcony, and together they watched them bloom, one tiny victory at a time. One morning, she received a message from Monroe, asking her to meet him at a small community center on the city's west side. When she arrived, She found him standing among rows of desks where children were drawing. He turned as she entered. "I thought you should see this," he said softly. Grace looked around. The walls were covered with bright posters that read, "Learning today, leading tomorrow." A young boy ran up and handed her a crayon drawing of a wallet with a heart in the middle. "Miss Grace," he said proudly, "they told us you are the lady who returned something that did not belong to her. That means you are honest, right?" Grace smiled gently and knelt beside him. "Yes," she said. "It means when you do what is right, good things can grow from it." The boy grinned and ran off. Monroe watched the exchange quietly. "They built this center in honor of the program," he said. "It is called the Grace Initiative." She turned to him, stunned. "You did not." "It was not me," he said. "It was the board. They wanted something that reminded us why we started all of this. You gave us that reason." Grace's eyes filled with tears. "I do not know what to say." "You already said it years ago," he replied. "When you chose honesty over convenience." They stood there in silence for a while, watching the children laugh. Outside, the sunlight streamed through the windows, turning the air golden. "You know," Monroe said quietly, "when I first met you, I thought I was testing you. But looking back, I think the test was mine." Grace smiled softly. "Maybe it was for both of us." He nodded. "You reminded me that leadership is not about power, it is about integrity, and you showed me that doing what is right is not weakness, it is strength." She looked at him, her voice calm. "And you reminded me that sometimes all it takes is one person believing in another for everything to change." As the afternoon faded, they walked outside together, the city humming softly around them. The rain had stopped, and the streets glistened with reflected light. Monroe paused by his car and turned to her. "So, what is next for Grace Miller?" She smiled. "More work, more people to help. There is still so much to do." "I had a feeling you would say that," he said with a laugh. "Well, wherever you go next, make sure the world hears your story." Grace looked up at the sky, her voice barely above a whisper. "It is not my story that matters. It is what it reminds people of." As he drove away, Grace stood on the sidewalk, watching the children through the windows of the center. Their laughter rose above the noise of the city, bright and unbroken. She thought about that night years ago, standing in the rain outside the diner, holding a wallet she could have kept but chose to return. Everything had begun there with a choice so small it barely seemed to matter. Now it had become a legacy. She smiled to herself, whispering the words she lived by. "Honesty does not make you rich, but it makes you whole." And as the sun dipped behind the skyline, Grace walked forward, the echo of that truth lighting her path like a promise that would never fade. In this emotional and cinematic tale of redemption, kindness, and integrity, a poor waitress's single act of honesty changes not only her life, but also the heart of a powerful CEO. Inspired by millionaire stories that reveal how true wealth comes from compassion, this narrative follows Grace Miller as she returns a lost wallet and unknowingly begins a journey that transforms her destiny through struggles, moral choices, and the courage to stand for what is right. This story captures the essence of modern millionaire stories, where character outweighs fortune. From quiet sacrifices to moments of recognition, Grace's journey mirrors the best millionaire stories that remind audiences that power and success mean nothing without humanity. Blending emotion, resilience, and timeless values, this unforgettable story belongs among the most inspiring millionaire stories of our time, reminding every listener that doing the right thing will always lead to the richest ending.